Tropical depression. Here's where every hurricane story begins, with wind speeds crawling along at a maximum of 38 miles per hour, barely strong enough to mess up your hair. Those numbers sound pathetic until you realize this seemingly harmless system is already plotting your destruction. The clouds are loose, disorganized, like a drunk person trying to find their way home. But underneath this innocent appearance, something sinister is brewing. A tropical depression doesn't need hurricane-force winds to kill you. Instead of relying on raw wind power, it weaponizes water. These systems can park themselves over a region and dump ungodly amounts of rain. We're talking about atmospheric rivers that can drop a foot of water in hours. Picture this. You're not worried because it's just a depression, and suddenly your neighborhood becomes a lake and rescue teams are pulling people off rooftops. The depression stage is deceptive. Your local meteorologist might barely mention it, but this is when you should be paying attention. Every Category 5 monster that's ever terrorized the coastline started exactly like this, as a numbered depression that most people ignored. Depression 12 in 2005, that became Hurricane Katrina. The atmosphere is already organizing, the ocean is already feeding the system energy, and the rotation is already there. You're looking at a baby that's about to grow very, very fast. What makes this stage terrifying isn't what it currently is, it's what it's becoming. The storm doesn't have a name yet, just a number, but meteorologists are watching it like hawks because they know something you don't. When conditions are right, this harmless swirl can explode in intensity overnight. Tropical storm. Now wind speeds have climbed past the 39-mile-per-hour threshold, and suddenly this storm has earned a name from the rotating list. Maybe it's Alex, or Bonnie, or Ian. The name of the storm means it's now being tracked 24/7 by hurricane hunters, pilots who literally fly into these systems to measure their strength. When they're paying that much attention to something, you should be too. The winds are still nothing compared to what's coming, but something fundamental has changed. The storm is no longer a loose collection of thunderstorms, it's organizing, developing that signature spiral structure you see in satellite photos. Think of it like watching someone put on armor piece by piece. Each new band of thunderstorms is another layer of protection, another weapon in the storm's growing arsenal. Tropical Storm Allison in 2001 never became a hurricane, yet it essentially drowned the whole city of Houston. The storm stalled and dumped over 40 inches of rain. That's more than 3 feet of water falling from the sky. Hospitals flooded, research labs were destroyed, the city's bayous turned into raging rivers that swallowed cars whole. Allison killed 41 people and caused $15 billion in damage, all without ever reaching hurricane strength. This is where you learn that the Saffir-Simpson scale, the scale used for measuring hurricane's intensity, only measures wind, but wind is just one weapon in a tropical cyclone's arsenal. A tropical storm can spawn tornadoes in its outer bands, push storm surge into coastal areas, and most dangerously, it can stall. When a tropical storm stops moving, it becomes a stationary rain machine, and that's when entire regions flood. And then the atmosphere decides to step things up another level. Category 1 hurricane. Wind speeds reach 74 miles per hour and everything changes. That's the magic number where the storm now officially wears the title hurricane, and with good reason. These winds can sustain the power of an EF0 tornado, but spread across hundreds of miles and lasting for hours instead of minutes. Picture driving down the highway at 80 miles per hour, then imagine that same force hitting the side of your house for 6 straight hours. That's what separates a tropical storm from a Category 1 hurricane. The wind becomes a sledgehammer, systematically dismantling everything in its path. Shingles peel off like someone's ripping band-aids off skin. Tree branches snap with gunshot-like cracks. Power lines drop like spider webs in a windstorm. But here's what gets overlooked. Category 1 hurricanes are masters of deception. Hurricane Florence in 2018 weakened to Category 1 before hitting North Carolina, and people breathed a sigh of relief. Big mistake. Florence proceeded to park itself and unleash record-breaking rainfall. Rivers rose to levels not seen in 1,000 years. Entire towns disappeared underwater. 41 people died, and the damage hit $15 billion, all from a weak Category 1 hurricane. The storm now has a well-defined eye, visible on satellite like a massive unblinking pupil staring down at Earth. That eye represents the hurricane's organizing power. It's no longer just a storm, it's become a machine engineered for destruction. The eye wall surrounding that calm center contains the strongest winds, and as the storm intensifies, that eye wall becomes more defined, more focused, more deadly. Category 1 is where mobile homes start getting shredded. It's where shallow-rooted trees get uprooted en masse. It's where coastal areas see their first taste of significant storm surge, maybe 3 to 5 feet above normal, enough to flood low-lying areas and make oceanfront roads impassable. Most importantly, Category 1 is where the psychological shift happens. This is no longer weather, it's an event. It's something that will be talked about for years, that will divide local history into before the hurricane and after the hurricane. The winds are about to double in destructive power. Category 2 hurricane, wind speeds surge from 96 to 110 miles per hour. We've now entered the realm where hurricanes sound like freight trains and buildings start failing in ways their architects never imagined. The storm's eye is now clearly visible, often perfectly circular, like a giant's iris staring down from space. Inside that eye, winds are nearly calm, but surrounding it is a ring of violence that can snap large trees like twigs and turn everyday objects into missiles. We're talking about winds strong enough to drive pieces of straw through telephone poles. Not an exaggeration, but documented fact. Category 2 winds create a sound you never forget. Survivors describe it as standing next to a jet engine, but the jet engine never shuts off for hours. The howling becomes so intense it penetrates your bones, making sleep impossible even if you're in a sturdy shelter. Windows vibrate in their frames like they're trying to escape. Hurricane Ike in 2008 made landfall as a strong Category 2, but it carried a secret weapon. The storm was absolutely massive in size. Instead of typical Cat 2 surge, Ike generated a Category 4 level storm surge, reaching up to 17 feet high because its wind field was so enormous. Entire communities on the Bolivar Peninsula were wiped off the map. Not damaged, not flooded, but completely erased. What had been neighborhoods became empty beaches scattered with debris. The deception continues. Ike's moderate Cat 2 winds knocked out power to millions in Houston for weeks. We're talking about July in Texas, with no air conditioning, no refrigeration, no fans. People fled the city not because of the storm, but because of the aftermath. The electrical grid was physically shredded by winds that the Saffir-Simpson scale calls extremely dangerous, but many people dismiss as moderate. Category 2 is where well-built homes start sustaining major damage. Entire sections of roofing can be peeled away like aluminum foil. Exterior walls can fail if they're not properly reinforced. Nearly every tree in the storm's path will be either snapped or uprooted, turning suburban neighborhoods into obstacle courses of fallen timber. The storm surge from a Cat 2 can reach 6 to 9 feet above normal tide levels, enough to completely inundate barrier islands and make coastal highways look like rivers. The combination of wind and water creates a 1-2 punch that levels communities, but we're only getting started. Category 3 hurricane. Wind speeds climb from 111 to 129 miles per hour. Welcome to major hurricane status, a designation that isn't just meteorological, it's psychological. This is where hurricanes stop being weather events and become natural disasters that reshape communities for decades. The eye wall is now a perfectly defined ring of destruction, with often containing mesovortices, smaller whirlwinds within the eye that can cause wind speeds to spike even higher than the storm's official intensity. Picture tornadoes spinning inside an already massive tornado, and you're starting to understand the violence contained in a Category 3's core. These winds are equivalent to EF2 tornado strength, but instead of lasting 30 seconds and affecting a narrow path, they're sustained across hundreds of square miles for hours. The sound becomes indescribable. Survivors struggle to find words because human language wasn't designed to describe this level of atmospheric violence. Hurricane Katrina made landfall as a Category 3, though it had been a Cat 5 just hours before. Even at reduced strength, Katrina's storm surge overwhelmed levees around New Orleans, flooding 80% of the city. The storm surge on the Mississippi coast reached 25 to 28 feet, the height of a 3-story building. Entire communities were scoured down to their foundations. Casino barges were picked up and deposited miles inland. Category 3 is where landscapes get permanently altered. Forests that took decades to grow are snapped off at chest height, creating graveyards of broken trunks that stretch to the horizon. The Outer Banks maritime forests, sculpted by centuries of storms, can be obliterated in a single Category 3 passage. The storm surge becomes truly biblical, 9 to 12 feet or more above normal tide levels. This isn't flooding, it's temporary geography change. Areas that have been dry land for centuries become ocean floor for hours. The surge doesn't just bring water, it brings everything the ocean can pick up: boats, cars, houses, debris from previous storms, sand, fish, and sometimes things you'd rather not identify. Power outages become long-term infrastructure failure. We're not talking about days without electricity, we're talking about weeks or months. The electrical grid doesn't just lose power, it gets physically destroyed. Transmission towers built to withstand extreme weather get twisted into abstract art sculptures. Most terrifying is the aftermath. Areas hit by Category 3 hurricanes are often declared uninhabitable for weeks or months, not because it's unsafe, but because there's literally nothing left that supports human civilization. No power, no water, no sewer systems, no passable roads, no functioning buildings. The violence is about to become medieval. Category 4 hurricane. Wind speeds accelerate from 130 to 156 miles per hour. We've now entered the realm where physics becomes weaponized and ordinary objects transform into instruments of destruction. The winds are now strong enough to drive 2x4 pieces of lumber completely through concrete walls. This isn't hyperbole, it's documented in post-storm damage surveys. The kinetic energy at these wind speeds creates forces that exceed the structural limits of almost everything humans build. Even well-constructed homes start losing fundamental components, and entire roofs can be lifted off and thrown hundreds of yards away. Hurricane Michael hit the Florida Panhandle in 2018 with 160-mile-per-hour winds, officially upgraded to Category 5 after post-storm analysis. Mexico Beach was essentially deleted from the map. Entire city blocks were reduced to concrete slabs and debris piles. The storm's winds were so intense they sandblasted buildings, stripping paint off concrete and bark off trees. Pine forests for miles inland were snapped off like matchstick. The eye of a Category 4 often becomes perfectly defined, sometimes developing a stadium effect where the eye wall rises like vertical walls around the calm center. Hurricane hunters flying into these storms report clear skies in the eye, with winds dropping to nearly calm, then hitting a wall of violence as they exit into the eye wall. The contrast is so stark, it feels surreal. Category 4 storm surge can reach 15 to 20 feet above normal levels, but the real terror comes from the surge's speed and power. This isn't slowly rising water. It's a moving wall of ocean that can travel inland for miles, carrying away everything that isn't anchored to bedrock. Hurricane Hugo's surge in 1989 traveled 20 miles inland in South Carolina, turning farmland into temporary seafloor. The psychological impact becomes existential. People who experience Category 4 hurricanes often describe feeling like they're under attack by the planet itself. The winds don't just howl, they scream with a sound that makes rational thought nearly impossible. The house doesn't just shake, it moves in ways buildings aren't supposed to move, flexing and groaning like a living thing in pain. After a Category 4, entire regions require humanitarian assistance. We're talking about FEMA tent cities, military-supervised distribution of basic supplies, and the kind of emergency response usually reserved for war zones. Recovery isn't measured in weeks or months, but in years. Some communities never fully recover. But the atmosphere has one more level of violence in its arsenal: Category 5 hurricane. Wind speeds explode past 157 miles per hour and beyond, the theoretical maximum, the atmospheric equivalent of nature's nuclear option. There is no Category 6 because at this point, the destruction is already total. The difference between 160 and 190 mile per hour winds is academic when both can erase entire cities. Category 5 hurricanes exist at the very limits of what Earth's atmosphere can produce. They represent the perfect storm of oceanic heat, atmospheric instability, and meteorological conditions. Only 4 Category 5 hurricanes have made landfall in the United States in recorded history. Each one became legendary: the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, Hurricane Camille in 1969, Hurricane Andrew in 1992, and Hurricane Michael in 2018. Their names are spoken with the same reverence reserved for earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The 1935 Labor Day hurricane hit the Florida Keys with 185 mile per hour winds and a pressure reading of 892 millibars, the lowest ever recorded in the United States. The storm literally sandblasted the Keys, stripping pavement off roads and snapping palm trees at ground level. Bodies were carried so far out to sea they were never recovered. The hurricane destroyed the railroad connecting the Keys to the mainland, and some of the smaller islands were completely scoured clean. Hurricane Andrew hit Homestead, Florida with 165 mile per hour sustained winds and gusts well over 175 miles per hour. The storm destroyed over 25,000 homes and left 160,000 people homeless overnight. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to debris fields where nothing recognizable remained. The destruction was so complete that emergency responders had difficulty finding street signs to navigate the wreckage. The winds at Category 5 intensity create forces that exceed human comprehension. Pressure exerted by 150 plus mile per hour winds approaches 250 pounds per square foot, enough to explode windows inward and collapse exterior walls. Objects become supersonic projectiles. Pine needles have been found driven completely through tree trunks. Pieces of grass become sharp enough to cut skin. The storm surge from a Category 5 can exceed 20 feet above normal tide levels, but the real terror is in the surge's behavior. It doesn't flow like water. It moves like a horizontal avalanche, carrying away cars, boats, houses, and everything else in its path. Hurricane Camille's surge reached 24 feet on the Mississippi coast, picking up casino barges and depositing them miles inland. The eye of a Category 5 often develops a clear stadium-like structure visible from satellite imagery. The eye wall becomes a perfect ring of destruction, sometimes so well defined it looks artificial. The contrast between the eye's eerie calm and the surrounding violence creates an almost supernatural atmosphere. Most terrifying is the aftermath. Areas hit by Category 5 hurricanes don't just lose power and water, they lose the concept of civilization. Roads disappear under debris, landmarks vanish, entire communities are erased so completely that survivors have difficulty finding where their homes once stood. Recovery isn't a matter of rebuilding, it's a matter of starting over from bare earth. The psychological trauma of experiencing a Category 5 is permanent. survivors describe feeling like they've been through combat, because in a sense, they have. They've survived the direct assault by the most powerful force Earth's atmosphere can generate. Many develop PTSD from the experience, triggered by storm warnings years later. Category 5 hurricanes represent the absolute pinnacle of natural destruction on Earth. They're reminders that despite all our technology and engineering, nature still possesses forces that can humble human civilization in a matter of hours. When satellite imagery shows that perfect spiral with the clearly defined eye, and the hurricane hunters report winds exceeding 157 miles per hour, you're looking at one of the rarest and most powerful phenomena our planet can produce. The progression from tropical depression to Category 5 hurricane represents one of nature's most dramatic transformations. From a loose swirl of clouds to a force capable of rewriting geography, each stage brings exponentially increasing danger, and each stage has left its mark on human history through the communities it has forever changed.